Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited, in association with Max Allan Collins, presents True Noir, The Assassination of Anton Cermak, a 10-chapter, fully immersive audio drama. You can order the series now on Kickstarter at True Noir. Just go look it up. We have an all-star cast coming at you. Favorites like Katie Sackhoff, Jeffrey Combs, Bill Sadler, who actually played Death in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, Anthony LaPaglia, and many, many more. Go to True Noir on Kickstarter and take your preferred, well, you can have it any way you want. You can have it as digital audio files. You can get it on Blu-ray with multiple sound mixes. We haven't put it up yet, but maybe a vinyl box set is more your style. I directed, produced, and edited. So come, help me out. Greetings, Imagination Connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the maybe never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett. And I am robcasting at you Imagination Connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations, episode number 978. You know, there's no way around it. I think about Star Wars a lot. I know. It's probably something that you looked at me and said, he never thinks about Star Wars. I do. I think about Star Wars quite a bit. I've thought about Star Wars, well, for over, well, not quite over 50 years, but close to 50 years. And, you know, I think about Star Wars a lot. It's never really far from my thoughts. You know, there's just stuff everywhere. Here's my fine molds. I know it's not the Bandai, it's the fine molds. 1/72nd scale Millennium Falcon model, which I built and painted myself. Of course, I went a little heavy on the exhaust, on the deflector shields, you know, the blast, whatever that is, whatever you want to call that. But this was actually a very fun model to build because you had to put in all these little pieces on the back, all the little doohickeys they stole off other models. But anyway, I don't know, you know, Star Wars is in the air and everywhere. It's all around me, as Steve Sansweet would say. Now, so here's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about the first time I ever saw Star Wars, which was opening weekend. It opened, you know, May 25th, 1977. I believe that was a Wednesday. Was it a Wednesday? My dad took me, I famously told this story, me and Gardner Morelli, my friend Gardner Morelli, down. We were 10 years old. We were in the 4th grade. I was in Mrs. Walton's 4th grade class at Island Park Elementary School on Mercer Island, Washington, where I grew up, hometown. Home suburb. Couldn't even afford to live there today. My house that we lived in, my parents bought it for $30,000 in 1964, and it's like $2 million now. Our house that I grew up in. I could never afford to live in the house that I grew up in. Crazy. But good for the people that bought it for $160,000 in 1988 from us. Good for you people. That was quite the investment. But anyway, so I had already been a fanatical science fiction, fantasy, and horror junkie even at 10 years old. I've told the story how I really became aware of everything when I was 5. I started watching Star Trek when I was 5. I started watching Twilight Zone when I was 5. Outer Limits. Sci-Fi Theater on Channel 11. We'd come back. I had to go to Sunday school. Being raised a Jew, I went to the synagogue. I went to Sunday school every Sunday. And after I got home, right when I got home, it was usually 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, and Sci-Fi Theater was on. And Sci-Fi Theater would show all the classic movies, the George Powell movies like Conquest of Space and When Worlds Collide and War of the Worlds. I loved all those movies. I saw Godzilla movies. I saw bad science fiction movies they came from beyond space with Michael Gough, who played Alfred in Tim Burton's Batman movies. I guess Michael Gough was also Alfred in Schumacher's Batman movies too, but They Came from Beyond Space, not a great movie, but he played the Moon Master. But I didn't care. I would watch anything to do with space, science fiction, anything. I'd see it all. Logan's Run came out in 1976, blew my mind. And when I was a kid, I got to see like John Gilman's King Kong, of course, in 76. I saw Jaws in the theater when it first came out. Took a while. Parents wouldn't let me go right away, but eventually I did get to see it. But it had been playing for a long time. But I was a movie fanatic, and I was reading science fiction novels. I was crazed. So the thing about Star Wars was until... I didn't know anything about it until I remember seeing the commercials. And that's when I first became aware of it, 3 weeks out. Because, you as a kid, you weren't aware, because there was no internet, you didn't know what was coming. Now it seems silly because we know it's coming months and months and months, if not years in advance. But when I saw the trailers for Star Wars, it's hard to convey how insane it made me. It was all I thought about. I remember going to dreaming about these trailers because there had never been anything quite like it. The look of it. Science fiction films up to that point, not a lot of verisimilitude. The year before, Logan's Run came out and won the Academy Award for Best Special Effects. But even I, as a 9-year-old, when the camera's panning through the domed city in the beginning of Logan's Run with Jerry Goldsmith's really cool score, wah, 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 you could be like, that's a miniature set. Even I knew. I was an astute viewer at 9. I'm like, those are cool miniatures, but that was that's a miniature set, man. It's not very convincing, even to a 9-year-old. It was badass. Loved it. I loved Logan's Run. It was great. But, it still was... They were inside at a shopping mall, basically, the apparel mart that no longer exists outside of Dallas, and then they were outside. But it was apparent to me from the trailers from Star Wars, it was like nothing anybody had ever seen. Nothing I'd ever seen. And I'd seen a lot by then, because there wasn't a lot to see. There wasn't a lot of... there was a lot of cheesy movies, but there wasn't a lot of serious, thoughtful science fiction. At the time, Planet of the Apes and War of the Worlds and Logan's Run were my favorite movies. And, stuff like Forbidden Planet. But War of the Worlds was top of that pyramid. But nothing could have prepared me. So when Gardner Morelli and my dad took us downtown Seattle, to the UA 150 Theater, and this is the very first time in my life I'd ever seen a line. I thought nobody knew about this movie but me. This was my movie. And there was the longest line. It was all the way around these it was 2 blocks long. It was huge. And there was no way that we were going to get in. And I was really upset, but it also taught me a lesson. I thought I was an island of one. I was the only person interested in this movie, and clearly other people were interested in it. And I'm like, how do they know about this? Who the fuck are these people? Probably didn't think, who the fuck are these people? But I was like, what's going on here? Come on. So we didn't get in. And my dad took us instead. I think this was Saturday. It might have been Saturday. I keep forgetting whether it was Friday. I think it was Saturday. So we didn't get in the Saturday, the weekend it opened. We went and saw, my dad, though, took me to see a double feature. Me and Gardner, we got to see The Car and Race with the Devil. We were in heaven. So, I was upset I didn't get to see Star Wars that day, but The Car and Race with the Devil, 2 movies about the devil and satanic cults. Come on, man. Even as a 10-year-old, I'm like, yeah. But anyway, so got home. And my neighbors across the street, the Chambers, Pete Chambers, was a year below me. And so he was in, I think Pete was in the 3rd grade. And then his sister, Emily, was in 1st grade or something. And they were going to go see Star Wars. And I go, they asked if I want to go. And I said, yes, I want to go, but we have to go 3 hours early. And they were dubious. I said, no. You have to have seen what I saw. You have to trust me on this. we got to go 3 hours early, and probably earlier. But we went 3 hours early. We got in line. We were still kind of halfway back, but we got in, and we got good seats. Now, imagine, if you will, I'm in the UA 150 theater. It's a huge theater. It's packed. There's not a seat left. Everybody's excited. Everybody wants to see Star Wars. Word had trickled out how good it was. And sitting in that theater, you know, the 20th Century Fox logo comes on and then goes to black, Lucasfilm Limited, and then, boom, the Star Wars logo. We've all seen it a million times. Ba, 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 ba. You know, you're like, holy shit. I mean, this movie just hit hard right from the get. And then everyone's reading the crawl, and I'd never heard this sound before. It's all, it was everybody reading the crawl. I don't even know if people were aware that they were like reading out loud or whispering it to themselves. They were just like, it is a period of civil war, rebel spaceships striking from a hidden base of wonderful victory of the evil club. You know, same thing. And then what was wild is then you watch the crawl, as you all know, go back. But imagine I'm sitting in this gigantic theater, this beautiful domed theater. It was huge. And the music, I mean, this print, this stereo sound, it was unbelievable. And you know, the camera pans down. You see the two, moons of Tatooine. And then what was really interesting, and I've said this before, when the camera settles down in every single science fiction movie before Star Wars, even in 2001, you always saw, like, and in Star Trek too, you saw a planet, a sphere, or you'd see a quarter of a sphere, but you knew it was a sphere. That's how planets were always depicted. But in Star Wars, when the camera pans down and you see Tatooine basically filling the entire horizon, but, you know, you're in orbit, no one had ever seen that before. And I, as a veteran science fiction fan at 10, I was struck by, okay, you've got two moons and then you have Tatooine. That was wild. And to see it, it was amazing. Like, there had never been anything like that. And then, of course, the Tantive 4 slams into frame, followed by Imperial Star Destroyer. We've all seen it 100 million times. But that first time, it was so mind-blowing because there had never been anything like it ever. Never. No one had ever, there's nothing remotely similar, the visual effects, all of it. No one had ever seen anything like that. Now, 2001 was the gold standard of visual effects, but it was going after something different. And I had seen 2001, and I had liked 2001, but this was different because immediately it's Star Wars, you know, and then you cut back in, you meet R2 and 3PO, and you're off to the races. Now, because you'd never seen anything like this, and nobody had, the joy of the new, of seeing like every single thing that came on camera, every single uniform, every single, you know, droid, the mouse, right, the Jawas, you know, Houdini, whatever. I mean, nobody had seen any of this shit. No one had heard it. You know, there was no, other than maybe the Wilhelm scream, but there was no one had seen anything like this. It was all new. And it was so mind-blowing. And to my 10-year-old self, it was as if I was actually watching dreams I'd had projected in front of me. And, of course, the way that the universe was presented in Star Wars was very matter-of-fact. People would just talk about stuff like we were supposed to understand it. You know, your sad devotion to that ancient religion. You, my friend, are the last of their kind. Whatever. I mean, all this stuff, you're getting all of this backstory in casual conversation. And you have to keep up. The movie just asks you to keep up. You know, it doesn't stop and go, well, look, here's a lightsaber, and it's got a kyber crystal, and depending on your mood, you can change the color of the blade. None of that shit. But it was this was an elegant weapon for a more civilized age. That was it. You know, that was it. That's all you needed to know. It was a tool. It was a lightsaber. It was, according to Ben Kenobi, a weapon. That's what it was. That's all you need to know. And clearly, it's a sword, like a samurai sword, whether it's a katana, call it what you want. Ben Kenobi was even dressed basically like a samurai, kind of. So, I mean, it was an amazing experience. And when I came out of Star Wars, I had been transformed. And I was never the same after that. And my imagination had been expanded that day. And the possibilities of what cinema could be expanded that day. And then I've often talked about on the show, you know, one after the other. And the year after that, Superman the movie. The year after that, Alien. And all the other things that came along with it. Star Trek the Motion Picture, the Black Hole. Everything that happened in the wake of Star Wars. Cinema had changed. Effects technology had changed. Everything had changed. But Star Wars reigned supreme. Star Wars was everywhere. Everybody loved Star Wars. I had everything. Ralph McQuarrie's portfolio, the Star Wars sketchbook, the Star Wars blueprints. I read every single book. In 1978, Splinter of the Mind's Eye came out, and that's where I learned what Kyber crystals were. And if you really think about it, Splinter of the Mind's Eye could kind of be canonical, even though Luke and Leia are not canonical in that book. Or they were. Anyway, you all read it. If you haven't read Splinter of the Mind's Eye, go read it. But it was a big deal when it came out. And famously, if Star Wars hadn't made any money, it might have been the low-budget sequel. Splinter of the Mind's Eye might have been The Empire Strikes Back. But anyway, Star Wars changed the world. Everybody loved Star Wars. Everybody did. But the people that had seen it loved it because it did the same thing to them as it did to me. It was a transformative experience. Totally transformative. And no one was the same. I mean, it sounds like hyperbole, but it really isn't. Because when you see something that's new, I would say, you know, there have also been times recently, I've talked about this before, seeing photorealistic dinosaurs in '93 in Jurassic Park. That was pretty amazing. Seeing some of the visuals in The Matrix in '99, pretty amazing. CG creatures, whether it's Gollum or whether it's the apes, Caesar, or King Kong, what CG technology at its best has brought us. But the thing about Star Wars was it wasn't just the quality of the visual effects. It was the entire universe. It was the entire lived-in world. Like, those are moisture evaporators. Like, they didn't really explain, you know, evaporators are very similar, you know, low lifters in many respects, whatever. I mean, it was, everything was different. Everything was new. Land speeders, sky hoppers, why were TIE fighters shaped like that? I mean, it was wild to see, like, the Imperial technology, and you look at TIE fighters, like, I mean, I know it was Ralph McQuarrie and the design team and all those people at ILM, or the new ILM, the prototype of ILM, what ILM was at the time. Who would have thought like this at the time when you first look at this design? I mean, now we all know what this is, and now we know how important this ship was. But at the time, this was a really weird design for a spaceship. And when you watch Star Wars for the first time, it was really difficult to understand. Now, this is a much more screen-accurate model than the AMT model that came out at the time, like in '78. But imagine seeing this. This didn't look anything. I mean, I know it's kind of a saucer shape, but it looked nothing like any spaceship of the day. TIE fighters. Where'd all this stuff come from? I mean, none of it looked like, it didn't look anything like Star Trek. It didn't look like Jerry Anderson spaceships, like, you know, the Interceptors from UFO. Didn't look anything like that. I mean, it was so crazy. It was so unbelievable. And when you're watching Star Wars, every single second was full of shit that you're learning about this universe, like every single thing, every single design, everything that happens in that movie. Now it's all taken for granted, but because it's almost 50 years old, so everybody's seen it. But at the time, the frame was full. Like, why did the rebel troops' helmets look like that? Don't know. They just looked really cool. What did Darth Vader's armor? Can you imagine what it was like the first time to see Darth Vader come through the door of the Rebel blockade runner for the first time out of the smoke with that was crazy. I mean, it was so wild to see all that for the first time. I mean, imagine what that's like. And I was seeing it with the world was seeing it for the first time. That opening weekend was transformative because nobody had ever seen a fantasy film, a science fiction movie, a horror movie that had that kind of verisimilitude, that kind of fantasy, sci-fi verisimilitude. I mean, horror had seen verisimilitude like in The Exorcist. Jaws had a certain amount. I mean, people go back and look at the shark, okay. But at the time, terrifying. Jaws was terrifying. No one had seen anything like that. But science fiction, Logan's Run, which came out a year before, looks like it came out 30 years before if you look at it now. Even though those movies are a year apart, if you go back and you watch Logan's Run and Star Wars, that was the difference. That was the leap in technology. It was crazy. And then, of course, 3 years later, when The Empire Strikes Back came out, I remember stressing out, like, you know, sequels other than, say, Godfather Part 2, sequels were not necessarily going to be great. What do we have back then? I mean, the Planet of the Apes sequels, I loved them, but, you know, it's not like they were all like the first one. Airport 75, Airport 77. By the time Empire Strikes Back came out, the Concorde, Airport 79 had come out, and boy, that was a terrible movie. I saw that in the theater, but I kind of like it now. But boy, I was disappointed the first time I saw it because all the special effects were like animated. It just wasn't good. But so when Empire Strikes Back came out, you know, I was worried. Could it be the same transformative experience? I saw it 26 times in the theater. It plussed Star Wars. Took everything that was in Star Wars and made it better. I mean, and it was a different story. And also at the time all this stuff was coming out, I was younger, obviously. Empire Strikes Back came out in the same week that I was bar mitzvahed. I was Jewish. I'm Jewish, so to be bar mitzvahed, it's this ceremony where you become a man. I had to learn Hebrew, you know, studied for years. You have to read from the Torah, and get up in front of everybody. And you get a lot of money from your rich relatives, which was great because the summer of 1980, I also got a VCR, and that was a big deal. Going to buy my first videotapes, first physical media, 44 fucking years ago, man. That's crazy. But anyway, so when Empire came out, you know, I was now 13. I went from a 10-year-old to a 13-year-old, and Empire kind of grew what Star Wars was to me at 10, as now I went into junior high school. And Empire came out when I was in junior high school. I'd moved from elementary school now I was in junior high was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. Changed over to middle school later, but it was still a junior high when I was there. So as I grew, Star Wars grew. And became more mature, became more interesting. Luke's journey became personally more interesting to me because I felt like even though I was younger than Luke, he was essentially like, the idea of being bar mitzvahed is you become a man. You accept more responsibility in your life. And Luke was going through that very same thing. He was becoming a Jedi, and I kind of felt like I'd been studying Hebrew and studying religious tradition. So, you know, I was kind of... So Luke's journey meant something to me. I wanted to be friends with the Han Solo guys, but Luke's journey meant something to me personally because I was going through that. So it was an amazing, amazing experience. And what those movies meant to me, and all the other movies, Star Wars, opened the floodgates to all kinds of excellent fantasy cinema. Suddenly, science fiction and horror or science fiction was bankable, but even horror and fantasy movies were getting made. I mean, movies like Phantasm, which I really loved. You know, Captain Phasma was a nod to Phantasm's Silver Sphere because J.J. Abrams is a big fan of Phantasm. But so Star Wars was it was incredibly meaningful to me. And then when I turned 16, another rite of passage, I got my driver's license and could drive. Well, Return of the Jedi came out in 1983, and I know this, I say this and people don't understand. It was the most disappointing experience. It seems strange. I'll call it the most disappointing cinematic experience I'd ever had. Because I didn't believe any of it. I didn't like the way it looked photographically. You know, when you see R2 and 3PO roll up to Jabba the Hutt's door, it's clearly just a set. The lighting is not convincing. You know, the thing comes down, goodness gracious me, and then you see the Gamorrean guard for the first time. All the design work looked like Saturday morning cartoon creatures. And as it went along, I mean, the swashbuckling save of Han Solo was fun. But again, it was stupid things like Boba Fett, who was presented as this badass in Empire Strikes Back, was turned into a buffoon. You know, Han Solo hits his backpack and he flies off and falls into the Sarlacc pit. I'm like, whose idea was that? And while I did like Luke confronting the Emperor at the end and Vader, that was an incredible scene. The rest of the movie is kind of pointless. You know, I watched it and I'm like, I didn't understand how two of the greatest fantasy movies that had ever been made up to that point were turned into, and there's many reasons. I mean, I won't get into it, but it was a journey for me as a fan, as somebody who had their life changed by Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back deep in that change, and then you get to Return of the Jedi, and in a way, maybe I had just outgrown it, but no, it was the reason Star Wars went from being something that its creator thought was going to fail to then, by the time you get to the third movie, it's supposed to be the most successful franchise ever, and it became, to me, meaningless. Even though I really appreciated the confrontation in the Emperor's chambers, the rest of the film was gobbledygook. It didn't hold together. It didn't take us anywhere we hadn't been. You show me another Death Star, it's like, well, of course they're going to blow that up. Why wouldn't they? They blew up the first one. Why are we seeing another Death Star around a forest planet? Even if it was, I understand what they were trying to do. It was going to be Wookiees on Kashyyyk or whatever. I get that. It just didn't work. I mean, it didn't work. You should have gone to Coruscant, the Imperial homeworld. You know, the Empire had taken over and assaulted. It should have been a Return of the King type massive situation. It wasn't. I won't litigate it. I mean, that was 41 years ago, so hey. But that's my journey with Star Wars. After Return of the Jedi came out, I still love Star Wars, and I will always love Star Wars, but it was no longer what it meant to me as a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old seeing two of the greatest fantasy films ever made, Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. And then Star Wars went away. It went away. Yeah, of course there were droids and the Ewok cartoons and Caravan of Courage and the Ewok Adventure, but for the most part, Star Wars went away. I finished high school. I went to college, got out of college, moved from Seattle to Los Angeles, and it wasn't until the early 90s that you had the Thrawn trilogy come out, Heir to the Empire, and then you had Dark Empire, the Dark Horse comic came out, and then through the 90s leading up to you had Shadows of the Empire, of course, the multimedia event without a movie. You had books, a video game, all that. And then the Star Wars special editions, when they came out, for me, this is a terrible thing to admit, but when I saw the Star Wars special edition for the first time, I hated it. I did not understand why all of these things were changed. Like, why would you take, for me, the verisimilitude, the perfect world building, and even the limitations of the special effects at the time? I looked at these changes that were like willy-nilly. First of all, having Greedo shoot first was like, the reason that was so, to me, so egregious. I understand, like in George's mind, he's like, didn't want Han Solo to be a murderer. Well, here's the thing. Nobody on planet Earth thought that. Nobody. Greedo had threatened Han Solo's life over my dead body. That's the idea. That was the threat. It was a mortal threat. Greedo was going to kill Han. Han got the drop on Greedo and killed him first. It was a gunfight. It was a million different westerns. Sorry for the mess. When that happened, I realized that in the intervening years between when Star Wars was made and 20 years later when we got the special editions, George Lucas had become a father. So had Steven Spielberg, his great friend. And Han Solo can't be a murderer. But he wasn't. You were following Western tropes, things that we'd seen, gunfights, since basically the dawn of cinema. But that's when I realized that the sensibility, somebody gets older, they change. And the sensibility, the things that were changed in Star Wars, okay, we have to put Jabba the Hutt in. You know, we have to make weird little changes. You have to show Rontos and Mos Eisley. Mos Eisley was a shithole. It was like an East Texas truck stop in the middle of just horrible landscape. But no, now it's this center of commerce, and it's huge. You know, Jawas are riding Rontos around, and there's a mirth-filled, you know, they fall off, and there's laughs, and all this goofiness, and there's so much shit flying around when, you don't need to see his identification. I'm like, why are we watching droids floating through this scene? The tension that was establishing, that they're about to get caught and Ben Kenobi uses the Force, it's so distracting. I realized that the sensibility that made the original Star Wars had changed. And the changes that were made to Star Wars told me that, it really wasn't relevant. And I went and saw that Empire and Jedi were less egregious. But still, they didn't. It was just weird to take. I felt like it was so willy-nilly and haphazard. It didn't feel like anybody had really put a lot of time into how to caress this stuff into the movie to make it all work. It was all, as soon as one of those new scenes came on and new CG effects came on, I was like, whoa. Because by that time I'd seen the movies hundreds of times, even Jedi. So I knew these movies backwards and forwards, and I thought that the sensibility behind the changes was not good. Didn't dig it. So, anyway, now here we are in 2024. The Acolyte has just ended. I mean, the thing is, Star Wars spoke to where I was in my life. Because Luke's journey from being a simple farm boy to becoming a Jedi Knight is the journey that all of us have to go through. We're not becoming Jedi Knights, but we're becoming something. You're becoming a grown-up if you're a kid. You have to pick a profession. You have to decide what you're going to do. You're going through life. And that's what Luke was going through. And as you go through life, you change. You become something different than you were. Hopefully, something better. And when the prequel trilogies came out, there was no more Luke Skywalker. Everybody was either a Jedi Knight, a politician, a Sith Lord. There was no more Lukes in Star Wars. There was no person that you were following these noble people. And while that was fine, and I just didn't connect to it at all anymore. And it wasn't because I was older. It was just the movies were different, and they were made for different reasons. They were not made. I mean, George Lucas, he had a great story to tell about the fall of democracy, but it was so stilted in its presentation and using all the new technology, it doesn't grab you. The prequel trilogy was very distancing, aside from the fact that people didn't even sound like they were talking to each other because half the time they weren't. Still, there was a lot to like visually and a lot of really interesting ideas. But it was all about Star Wars itself. It wasn't about the audience anymore. And I've said this on this show a lot. Luke was all of us in some way, shape, or form. And to me, while I watched it, my love of Star Wars that existed for 20 years, I watched it. But something I could watch over and over and over again, 26 times in the theater. Those days were over. Part of it was that I got older, but part of it was that the stuff didn't connect. But we're all Star Wars fans. The world. Multi-generations of Star Wars fans. Every kid goes through a Star Wars phase. Boy, girl, whatever. You go through a Star Wars phase. But I got to thinking, Star Wars fandom has, the way it exists now, Everyone's kind of a Star Wars fan, but now Star Wars has become so far removed from what it was when it first came out, the purity of it. Star Wars now is really only about itself. It's only about its own universe. It's not allegorical to the audience anymore. It's just really about itself. But fandom endures. Now let's bring me to the article that I wanted to talk about. Before I jump into this article, let's see some people have fired in some super chats. Roberto Suarez says, Robert, you just spoke about the theater where you saw your first THX movie. What happened to THX? The THX, remember all the movies that would start up with the THX logo? Is that no longer a thing? Well, Lucasfilm, one of the byproducts of Star Wars was ILM, all the effects technology that ILM, for even today, some of the greatest effects technology in the world for the last 50 years almost because of Star Wars. Lucasfilm, Pixar came out of Lucasfilm, but the THX program, that's really interesting. Let me see. Movies still exist. Let's see. I don't know. I'm looking up. I used to love the THX logo, but let's see. In 2016, Razer. Oh, this is interesting. In 2016, Razer Incorporated acquired THX. Having shared histories of commitment to excellence, Razer supports THX evolving to address ever-changing consumer needs for enjoying entertainment in the cinema, at home, and on the go. THX operates as a separate entity and has its own management, partner, and customer base. Now there is a THX website. So it even has this is really interesting. So to answer this question, I would have to delve into this to see where it is, but I didn't know that that's what happened. So I'm going to put this in the live chat. Here is the current THX company website, so you can go check it out for yourself. That's a really interesting question, Roberto. Scott Bartholomew says that Star Wars was a masterclass on world building. 100%. 100%. It was the gold standard. And I would dare say it's probably never been topped. Andrew K says, actually Oscar Herrera says, Star Wars managed to tap into our collective unconscious through its mythic themes, inspired by Lucas's studies of Joseph Campbell. People love myths. Absolutely. 100%. Andrew K says, would love to see an official 4K remaster of the original unaltered trilogy, but I think we'll have to wait. Love 4K 77 and Harmy's despecialized versions. Yep, have them both, and I agree with you. Thomas Logan says, the Megalopolis trailer in IMAX is a sight to behold. Coppola will be back on the radar this award season at age 85. Megalopolis and Nosferatu equals cinema. Well, Thomas, you are correct. I am looking forward to both of those. Now, let's jump into this article, and this is about Star Wars fandom. I thought this was a really interesting article. It was on Medium, and Daniel Paris, who wrote this, their fanfare section on Medium, they always talk about fandom stuff there. They always have really interesting articles, but Daniel Paris writes these really interesting statistical articles, and I thought we would share it. What makes Star Wars fandom so unique? A statistical analysis of entertainment's ultimate fan base. So, and this essay was originally published in Stat Significant, a weekly newsletter featuring data-centric essays about movies, music, and television. Intro. Arguably the most consequential deal in Hollywood history. In 1974, fresh off the breakthrough commercial and critical success of American Graffiti, director George Lucas set his sights on something rather untraditional for his next project, an epic space opera. He wanted to make Flash Gordon, by the way, but couldn't get the rights. American Graffiti had grossed over $140 million off a budget of $770,000, earning 5 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, yet Lucas struggled to find backers for his new sci-fi epic. Paramount, Disney, Universal, who had released American Graffiti, and United Artists all passed on the project, citing concerns over the commercial potential of the sci-fi genre and Lucas's relative inexperience. Determined to see his dream project greenlit, Lucas secured financing for Star Wars by making one of the most consequential business decisions in Hollywood history. He accepted a lower directing fee in exchange for retaining merchandising and sequel rights for the Star Wars franchise. That would never happen today. Lucas cut his salary from $500,000 to $150,000, and 20th Century Fox gave up rights to a toy sale that was unlikely to exist. Merchandising was not a significant revenue stream for studios in those days. 20th Century Fox's relinquishment of merchandising rights would go down as one of the most unfortunate business decisions in Hollywood history, and pretty much the history of any industry, as Star Wars has generated a mind-boggling $32 billion in merchandise sales to date. Each year, an estimated $3 billion in Star Wars licensed products are sold, and this figure is said to reach $5 to $7 billion in years coinciding with the Star Wars film release. Driven by a fan base of unparalleled size and dedication, Star Wars is one of the few media properties that exists as an enterprise unto itself, boasting an entire section of Disneyland, an unofficial holiday, May 4th, standalone Star Wars conventions, an endless parade of streaming series, $200 customizable lightsabers, and pretty much anything else a fan could want. In a modern entertainment industry built upon the patronage of steadfast fandoms, Star Wars is Hollywood's most lucrative and reliable franchise, a cherished cultural gem that has remained a mainstream phenomenon for over 50 years. So today, we'll explore the uniqueness of Star Wars fanhood, the incredible commercial footprint of this devoted fan base, and whether Hollywood's most formidable brand is losing its luster. The uniqueness of Star Wars fandom. As children exit toddlerhood, parents face a crucial decision of the utmost existential importance. What is the first movie to show my kids that they'll actually remember? For my father, the answer was Star Wars. After dropping my sister at Sunday school, we drive to a nearby theater to watch the original Star Wars trilogy on the big screen. My earliest movie-going memories involve sitting in DC's gigantic Uptown Theater, watching Star Wars A New Hope and Return of the Jedi. My dad likes to remind me of these outings, a catalyst for my lifelong infatuation with movies, and a relentlessly nostalgic moment of father-son bonding, much like watching Field of Dreams and having a catch. Present day. I now understand this experience to be an odd combination of intimate and universal. Watching Star Wars in early adolescence, as passed down by your parents, is both a highly personal, formative experience and extremely common. In an online poll of over 5,100 self-identified Star Wars fans, the median age of first viewing was 6 years old, with 90% of respondents having watched a franchise installment before the age of 13. Now, this is pretty cool. Now, when does Star Wars fandom begin? Look at this chart. And it starts out, okay, over here, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, this was the age I was, because Star Wars came out when I was 10. But it makes sense. Like, I saw Star Wars when it didn't. I lived in a world where it didn't exist for 10 years, and then I was 10, and it existed. But here it is. People are 5 years old. Now, what's interesting is that coincides in my own life to when I first saw Planet of the Apes, when I first saw War of the Worlds, when I first started watching Star Trek, and The Twilight Zone, the things that were the cornerstones of my love of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. 5. 5 was the age. And clearly, according to this, 5 is the age when people first see Star Wars. And this is the author again. For my generation, and perhaps all generations, Star Wars exists as a developmental milestone of sorts, which is odd for films with several frightening sequences like The Trash Compactor or Jabba the Hutt. For many or most fans, loving this franchise is indelibly linked to childhood nostalgia and familial bonding, or that they're just fucking cool. Inadvertently, Star Wars pioneered the model for modern fandom by hooking kids early and crafting universal stories that encourage lifelong loyalty. In a 2015 YouGov poll of 1,000 Americans, 75% of respondents considered Star Wars to be for everyone, a cultural keepsake for all generations. Similarly, a 2019 survey of over 145,000 respondents found Star Wars fandom to be equally prevalent across various generations and geographies. Amazingly, baby boomers and Gen Z are equally likely to identify as Star Wars fans, an area of common ground between two wildly different cohorts. Now, here is the prevalence of Star Wars fandom by age and region, which is really interesting. Now, you guys can take a look at this, but here's what's so strange to me. This narrative has arisen by George Lucas himself, saying he made Star Wars for kids. I don't believe that, because I was there when I was 10 years old. That theater was packed with everybody, and adults were in there too. Kids weren't lining up to see this movie. It was adults who were doing it, and they were dragging kids. So this notion now that Star Wars was made for kids, and people always say to me, well, you know, you've grown up. Yeah, I have grown up. But when I saw Star Wars for the very first time, it fit in, it slotted in with science fiction fantasy movies I've been watching up to that point in my life. And it was the very best of them. I mean, maybe not from an intellectual standpoint, but from a visceral and just an enjoyment standpoint, Star Wars was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. I mean, I loved Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes, but it wasn't nearly as fun as watching Star Wars. I loved Star Trek in a different way. Star Trek was meaningful to me on an intellectual level. Star Wars was meaningful to me on a level of just wonder, awe and wonder. There was awe and wonder in Star Trek too, but it was much more cerebral. Star Trek, I put my thinking cap on. Star Wars, I opened my mind and my heart and let it wash through me. And it was a different experience. But there's no way you can watch the original Star Wars in its unaltered form and think it was made for kids. It was made for everybody. And that's why everybody, you know, you talk to boomers and Gen Z, boomers took their kids and they all had their minds blown. When I went and saw Star Wars, it was families, man. And the parents loved it just as much as the kids. Let's move on. Star Wars fandom is slightly higher in North America than in other countries, though the franchise maintains a considerable global footprint. Is Marvel this popular in Asian Pacific countries? Does the DC Extended Universe covet such affinity from baby boomers? My guess is no. For better or for worse, Star Wars has maintained relevancy for nearly 5 decades, a feat only matched by Doctor Who, Saturday Night Live, and Dolly Parton. Star Trek 2. Another fascinating aspect of the Star Wars fan base is their unprecedented level of engagement. A survey of over 5,000 fans found that most devotees regularly consume news on franchise developments, own collectibles, watch cartoon adaptations, read world-building novels, and play Star Wars video games. Now here is Star Wars fandom engagement by activity. Follow news, have collectibles, watch cartoons, read novels, play video games, read comics, listen to podcasts, play board games, attend conventions, make art, cosplay, write fan fiction, go to meetups, and there should be watching YouTube videos about Star Wars on this list as well. So that's a lot of engagement. And fans, Star Wars fans, it's the same thing. If you get sucked in from a young age, you're locked in, man. It's a lifelong avocation being a Star Wars fan. It doesn't really go away. I mean, even though the modern Star Wars has left me cold, then again, I was left cold by Return of the Jedi in 1983. But that's okay. It will never change what it was like to be a Star Wars fan seeing Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back in the theater. Because those films aspired to so much, and they deliver the goods. There was nothing disappointing in either one of those movies. Nothing I was let down by. When I see Star Wars in Return of the Jedi, and I see R2-D2 and C-3PO face down in the sand against an obviously painted backdrop, and they have to get pulled out of the sand by magnets, I'm like, what the fuck is this, man? Why was this allowed to happen? How do you make something that's clearly a goof? They would never have allowed that shot in the original Star Wars, but it's in Return of the Jedi, and there's a lot of shots like that. Here lies the agony and ecstasy of the Star Wars franchise. Fans love engaging with this cinematic universe across myriad mediums and products, and this valorization often leads to buying stuff. In isolation, there's nothing wrong with spending money on something you love, that is, until the buying power of your fandom is quantified by someone in corporate America. Over the past 30 years, Hollywood has become increasingly risk-averse, demanding greater returns while avoiding downside risk exposure. As such, movie studios have increasingly relied on established fandoms, adapting beloved stories that come with built-in audiences, like Marvel and Harry Potter. And which fandom is the most valuable of them all? Star Wars. Consider this 2024 study of Amazon buying habits on May 4th, better known as Star Wars Day. For those unfamiliar, May 4th sounds like May the Force be with you, and has become an internet holiday marked by conspicuous consumption, much like Amazon Prime Day. Every year on May 4th, fans flock to the interwebs to further their love of this beloved franchise, which is a nice way of saying they post memes and buy stuff, with consumer demand for Star Wars products increasing by as much as 500%. Now look at this chart here. Change in consumer demand for Star Wars products in 2023. And you'll have to blow that up. It's hard for me to see here even, but there it is. There's a term in e-commerce known as activation, which describes a company's ability to activate customers into purchasing something, be it through email or some other marketing tactic. I apologize for the following sentence because it will read as extremely cynical. There is no clearer evidence of consumer activation potential than Star Wars spending on May 4th, or at least that's what a corporate marketeer is likely thinking. And here is where Disney enters the picture. A corporation built upon copyright, intellectual property, merchandising, and of course, fandom. In 2012, Disney acquired the rights to Star Wars through its purchase of Lucasfilm. Media's most valuable IP would henceforth be owned by a company best known for successfully commercializing IP. Star Wars fandom and commercialism. To be a Star Wars fan is to belong to one of the most coveted demographics in modern media. Sure, it may be odd to classify one's affinity for a franchise as a demographic, but that's how this group is often treated, studied, and advertised to. Consider this incredibly pointless Nielsen study from 2015 analyzing the purchasing power of Star Wars fans. Look at this, candy, cereal, and snacks. Now here's another funny thing that I just want to throw in as an aside as a Star Wars fan. The thing about Star Wars fans is within Star Wars fandom, we can have very specific interests. For instance, I like spaceship models, as evidenced by this Millennium Falcon model that I built. It does not have lights in it, though. I didn't put lights in it. It was already too much of a pain in the ass when I built it. But so, the thing about Star Wars is, if you're a Star Wars fan and you like spaceships, if you want to purchase them, you can buy plastic models of spaceships. You can buy Lego. Great Lego sets. Some of the best Lego sets ever made are Star Wars Lego sets. Star Destroyers, the Millennium Falcon, you name it. You all know. So if you're a fan of Star Wars, but you have this subset, the sub-interest in spaceships, which I do, you can just gravitate and go buy Star Wars spaceships. If you like action figures, obviously Star Wars really built the action figure market into what it is today. You can collect 6-scale Hot Toys figures. Before that, there were 6-scale, the Kenner 6-scale original Star Wars figures. Hasbro brought back the 12-inch, the 6-scale figures. And then, of course, Sideshow took over, and they made 6-scale figures. They still are, and then Hot Toys took over again. So if you want to just collect Star Wars action figures, you can. Then there's helmets, weapons. You can have subsets of fandom that you never run out of things to buy. So you're always engaged. And I love that about Star Wars fandom. I love the spaceship designs in the Star Wars universe. So if that's all I have a giant 6-scale snowspeeder right over there. I have the Millennium Falcon cockpit right over there for 6-scale figures. Now, I still love all that stuff. And if you're a big Star Wars fan, it's great. So the way to show your fandom from a merchandising perspective, maybe your jam is only Star Wars video games. Well, there's a lot of good ones. There's some bad ones, but there's a lot of good ones, and there always has been. I mean, I was obsessed with Shadows of the Empire in the mid-90s. I love that game for the N64. It was fantastic. Anyway, I mean, even in the arcades, the first Star Wars X-Wing video game was incredible. I mean, you know, the PlayStation 2 Bounty Hunter game wasn't that good, but, you know, there's always... But Force Unleashed, how long did I play that game for? You know, Battlefront, whatever your jam is. You know what I mean? So there's all this subset of Star Wars merchandise and other things that are adjacent to the movies and the shows that keep your fandom going and, honestly, are more satisfying than the actual canonical material that we've been getting in the theaters on the streaming shows. You know, if you want to give me a Lego Star Wars, hasn't let anybody down. Not that I think. Aside from the price, maybe. Now, this Star Wars fans spend more money than the average consumer per year. We've seen this chart up there. This is the author talking. I find this analysis fascinating for two reasons. The data here highlights nominal differences in spending behavior. A $4 increase in annual candy spending amounts to roughly 1.5 candy bars. It's astonishing that this research was commissioned at all. Nielsen, arguably the world's best-known media analytics firm, likely charged or spent thousands of dollars to conduct this study. Many adults likely worked on this, and only this for several weeks. And why was this project worthwhile? Because Star Wars is central to contemporary culture. Since acquiring Star Wars in 2012, Disney has sought to capitalize on the dedication and quantifiable buying power attached to this media property, releasing 4 films and launching countless streaming series. As a result, Star Wars content production has increased exponentially over the past decade as franchise expansions have become the cornerstone of Disney Plus programming. Now, this is really interesting too. Look at this. Total amount of Star Wars content over time in minutes, starting in 1978 and going all the way to 2022. Look at that. How much content over time in terms of minutes of Star Wars stuff that you can watch. Disney's proliferation of Star Wars content has been met with mixed reactions. Some shows and movies have done right by the franchise, The Mandalorian, The Force Awakens, while others have spurred frustration, The Acolyte, and The Last Jedi. That said, many fans, likely most fans, are probably unconcerned with passing judgment on these world-expanding installments. They're just happy to see new iterations of the things they love. While nothing compares to the original trilogy, it appears one's estimation of franchise installments is heavily driven by age. Those born in the 1960s and 70s have a higher appraisal of the original films compared to younger cohorts, while those born in the 1990s and 2000s are more likely to enjoy the sequels and prequels compared to their older cohorts. Favorability of Star Wars films by birth year and series. Now look at this. So you got the originals here, you've got the prequels here, and then the sequels here, and the birth year of people that like these. And it makes sense. I mean, this isn't any sort of earth-shattering, something that you wouldn't necessarily know, but we know. But it's interesting to see it quantified. So look at that. A separate study of fandom across generations from Rasmussen Reports found that those ages 19 to 39 find Disney Star Wars films better than the originals, while those ages 40 and above are more likely to consider Disney installments worse than the early films, because they are. Each generation may feel connected to their contemporary Star Wars, with the exception of The Phantom Menace and Jar Jar Binks. In 2020, The Mandalorian premiered on Disney Plus during the dark days of the pandemic and became an instant cultural phenomenon. According to Parrot Analytics, the first season of this series was watched 48 times more than the average streaming title. That's insane, making it Disney's most viewed streaming property to date. Over the next 4 years, Disney would double down on streaming content, releasing a barrage of Star Wars series, some good and some bad. This influx of content has led to claims of Star Wars fatigue. According to these critiques, Star Wars has benefited from scarcity, especially in the 16 years between Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace. And recent overexposure has diluted brand value and made each subsequent release less significant. Disney's recent stewardship of the Star Wars franchise has seen numerous missteps, provoking backlash or disinterest from fans, proof that diehard fandom definitely has its limits. 2018's Han Solo prequel, entitled Solo, lost a reported $77 million. The first Star Wars film that wasn't an unqualified box office success. A non-trivial segment of Star Wars fans are pretty unhappy about this year's The Acolyte and have subsequently review-bombed the show, inundating online sites with low user ratings. The reasons behind this online hostility could warrant a standalone article or series of articles, so feel free to Google it if you're craving Acolyte controversy. Disney's longtime CEO Bob Iger has admitted that the studio released too many Star Wars movies too fast. And now they haven't released any since 2019. These blunders could spell disaster for Star Wars' future, or this could be a series of meaningless data points, disparate outliers conceivably interpreted as the beginning of the end for a storied franchise. Disney is an easy punching bag for media outlets, so why not throw a few grenades at a corporation that cares little about your measly words? Will Star Wars overexposure lead to its own version of superhero fatigue, suffering a fate similar to Marvel circa 2023? Or will these concerns be forgotten minutes after Disney's next hit? A recent study revealed a 3-year decrease in online sales for Star Wars products. Yet another proof point for those in search of Disney schadenfreude. This decline could indicate the erosion of Star Wars fandom, or it could be noise. This is the change in consumer demand for Star Wars products between 2020 and 2024. Now, obviously, this is an overall look, but I would say is the demand, you'd have to break it down. What era of Star Wars products? Because if you're a Hot Toys fan like me, and you know a lot of Hot Toys collectors, they're buying everything. Whether they're buying the entire range of Ahsoka figures, they haven't announced any Acolyte figures yet for Hot Toys, but people that are buying Hot Toys Star Wars figures are buying Hot Toys Star Wars figures. So it would be interesting to see. I mean, I've said the same thing about Star Trek. You know, in terms of merchandising, nobody wants anything from the new shows. They're not, no one knows what they are. You have a great action figure of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Now, yeah, you could get the versions from Strange New Worlds, and I mean, look, I've talked a lot about how I dislike modern Star Trek. I did, however, get this Anson Mount 6-scale Star Trek figure. This will be the only figure I'm buying from Strange New Worlds, and the only figure I'm buying from modern Star Trek aside from Empress Georgiou from the Mirror Universe, because it's Michelle Yeoh. But I have no interest in buying figures from modern Star Wars either. So it depends. There's lots of great Star Trek products coming out that are all of classic Trek that I continue to buy, such as Tommy's upcoming $700 die-cast 350th scale miniature of the refit Enterprise from Star Trek The Motion Picture. Just like I will continue to buy Star Wars products from the original 3 films. Personally, I believe franchises go through ups and downs, much like any long-running media property. In Marvel's case, Disney took a year off from superhero releases, perhaps inadvertently cultivated a newfound sense of scarcity for superhero fare. Now the forthcoming Deadpool and Wolverine is the most anticipated movie this summer. All Disney had to do was not create content. Pretty wild. Star Wars fandom thrived between 1983 and 1999, a period with no theatrical releases or TV shows. Maybe the Star Wars extended universe needs a brief vacation to reinvigorate its franchise. Final thoughts? The duality of fandom. The Jungian thing, sir. That's not really what they mean by that. That was just the duality of Born to Kill and a peace sign. Anyway, that's Full Metal Jacket. This is the author speaking again. My primary frustration with Star Wars fandom, and most other fandoms, lies in the juxtaposition between childhood wonder and commercial interest. Childhood wonder. My dad first showed me Star Wars during early adolescence. He wasn't trying to entangle me in Disney's IP maximization strategy or send me on a treadmill of endless paraphernalia consumption. He just wanted to show me a thing that he loved. As a 6-year-old, I had little understanding of what loving A New Hope and Return of the Jedi might entail 20 years later, how I might become a data point in a meaningless Nielsen analysis on candy spending. I just thought, wow, this movie rocks, and I'm so happy to be sharing this experience with my dad. Commercial interest. Disney's business, from movies to parks to merchandise, is built upon extracting economic value from intellectual property. From Mickey Mouse to Inside Out 2's Anxiety, this corporation covets copyright protections over iconic characters, songs, and objects. If your child likes Baby Yoda, congratulations. You will now spend $100 on Baby Yoda dolls, t-shirts, stickers, and costumes, and you have no choice in this matter. Why would you want to deprive your 6-year-old of something they love? 30 years from now, Baby Yoda will be reworked into a Star Wars reboot, and your child, now an adult, will have no choice but to buy this merchandise for their kid. One 6-year-old's preoccupation with an adorable green Jedi may spawn a generational cycle of fandom. Most people won't contemplate the economic implications of their Star Wars, Moana, or Marvel fandom and how loving these characters may intersect with Disney's Q4 earnings. And you know what? That's probably for the best. If you're excited about new Star Wars shows, movies, and merch, then good for you. You've retained a sense of childlike wonder. You're not bogged down by meaningless cynicism. If you're reading this and grumbling about the state of the entertainment industry and its over-reliance on IP, then I'm sorry. You can bookmark this article in a folder entitled Proof of Our Dying Culture and then continue scouring the internet for evidence of how everything is worse. And the internet will be happy to oblige. I wish I could go back to Sunday screenings with my dad and watch Star Wars without disillusionment, perfectly content with franchise reboots and absent my fixation on Disney's corporate strategy. But I can't. And you know what? That stinks. So that's the article I wanted to share with you. That's from Medium, and Medium has a really interesting section, a fandom section, where they publish these kinds of articles. And this guy, Daniel Paris, writes a lot of these statistical analysis articles, and I find them quite interesting. But one of the things that is not mentioned in this article that I always think is worthy of talking about is, and as he pointed out, Disney's intent is not necessarily, they want good stories, but what they're more interested in is the synergy between how they're utilizing their IPs, and usually that's to make a TV show or a movie, and how they want to use that to then get you to buy $100 or $200 or $300 of merchandise from that thing. So ultimately, George Lucas's desire, remember, he had a lot of clout when he made American Graffiti, and he could have made something more studio friendly, but he wanted to do Flash Gordon. When he couldn't get the rights, he wanted to do his own space opera. Now, that was about the most uncommercial thing he could possibly do at the time. And Universal, that made a lot of money with him on American Graffiti, over $100 million on a less than $1 million spend, that's a gigantic hit. But they didn't want to invest in a space movie, which is crazy. It was only Alan Ladd Jr. who said, let's take a chance on this kid. And even when they made Star Wars, famously, it wasn't an easy thing to get done. And a lot of people contributed to shaping the movie into what it was. His collaborators didn't think he was making a kid's movie. Some people might have at first, but, his wife, people that work like Richard Chew and Paul and Marshall Lucas, they were editing the film. They were trying to make a film for everybody. And so, at the end of the day, when Star Wars was made, everybody on it that was working on that film on every level was trying to make the best movie they could. That was their driving force. Because Star Wars wasn't an IP yet. And famously, George Lucas went off to Hawaii with Steven Spielberg the week it opened, thinking he'd made a failure and nobody would go see it. But that's the funny thing to remember about Star Wars. And any great movie, any movie or anything that becomes an IP, the reason that the people made it was because creatively they were trying to satisfy, they were trying to make the best creative effort they could to create art. Sure, it takes a lot of money to make art, but once you have the money to make a movie, the people on that movie, especially when, for Lucas, he'd made THX 1138, he made American Graffiti. He hoped Star Wars would be as good as it was going to be. But when you get the money to make a movie, all you're thinking about is how to make that movie better. That's what you're doing. That's what any filmmaker is doing. But with Disney, they have bought this IP. So what they're trying to do is how can we maximize the value of this IP across all of the platforms that we merchandise on, whether it's our parks, whether it's toys, whether it's apparel, books, streaming shows, whatever it is. They want their IP to appeal to the most amount of people so they can make the most amount of money. Now, I would say that your core product, which is for Star Wars, let's call it movies, your core product has to be great, but it has to be made by people that know what they're doing, that are working to make the best movie possible. And then once the movie's great, then it drives everything else. But that can't happen when a corporation is deciding what should happen. I mean, the fact that you look at a movie like, I can't believe that The Rise of Skywalker exists. And as an experiment, and I'm sorry I'm going to inflict this on you, as an experiment, sit down one day and plan a double feature of Star Wars and The Rise of Skywalker. And when you're watching it, put on your analytics glasses and analyze how... Now, it's hard now because you can't get the original version of Star Wars, which didn't have Jabba the Hutt in it, where Greedo got shot, Han fires first. The altered version of Star Wars, this won't work on because it's not the same thing that came out originally in 1977 that kicked all this off in the first place. You're seeing a product from 1997, 20 years later, which is kind of unfair. But if you look up the despecialized versions of Star Wars or the 4K 77 version of Star Wars, you might want to start there. But what you're looking for is how everything unfolds. Even from the crawl, the opening crawl. Do an analysis of the opening crawl. What's really interesting about the opening crawl of Star Wars is you know nothing about Star Wars, so it has to tell you everything you need to know about the universe. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, rebel spaceships striking from a hidden base have won their first victory over the evil galactic empire. Okay. It's very general, but it's giving you, Princess Leia, custodian of the stolen plans, races home. So you get all this stuff, and in the next 5 minutes, everything that the crawl told you about, you see it. You see it. Rebel spaceships, you understand. Sinister agents, you understand all of that. So you've seen the crawl. It sets you up so it tells you what to look for. And then in the next 5 minutes after the crawl has gone away, it's everything that you saw in the crawl is reinforced, and everything it's told you, you've seen it. You know who the players are. You understand who the rebels are. You understand who the Empire is. You know the sinister agents. Everything. You're like, got it. It's a brilliant way to shape and craft the universe. Now, I would say that is like I think, if I was in charge of all Star Wars should start with a crawl. All of it. Whatever you see. I mean, maybe in episodic TV, you don't necessarily have to do it, but start from the beginning, set the stage with the crawl, and then in the next 5 minutes, reinforce that crawl by showing people stuff. Like, the Acolyte could have benefited from a crawl that detailed, what is the High Republic? No one's seen it on film before, so what is it? Why is it different? And then show us why it's different. In the Acolyte, when it starts out and you meet Carrie-Anne Moss in a bar, these people are like, where are we? You know nothing. They don't establish the world of the High Republic and make you understand in the Acolyte, why is this different? What's going on? And I think that's problematic of a lot of modern Star Wars. Look at the crawl at the beginning of Rise of Skywalker. It starts out, the dead speak. I mean, that you're supposed to believe that the last time we saw Sheev Palpatine and he was being thrown down a shaft and then the Death Star blows up, that he's somehow able to come back from that. Why? Why would you possibly believe that that's the case? I guess because people have come back. Darth Maul came back from the dead after being cut in half. But it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Especially because, well, where has he been? Now, if you've read the Dark Empire comics, there are clones of Palpatine. But none of that was established in real life. But so watch Star Wars and Rise of Skywalker and do it from an analytical standpoint and ask yourself how all of this unfolds. They tell you something, Mos Eisley Spaceport. You'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. You know, watch yourself, this place can be a little rough or whatever. Then they go into Mos Eisley, and what happens? They roar in, they meet stormtroopers. Then they go to the bar. Dr. Vazian and all the people in the bar, they get in a fucking lightsaber battle. Ponda Baba gets his arm cut off or whatever. You know, we know all this, but it's all set up. It's set up and payoff, set up and payoff. And when you watch the exposition dumps, you know, until this battle station is fully operational, we are vulnerable. The Rebel Alliance is too well equipped. Dangerous to your Starfleet commander, not to this battle station. Okay, I get it. But you're learning all this stuff in the middle of this, and you learn that these Imperial officers, the higher ups, they bicker, they fight, they don't all agree. They're part of the same galactic empire, but they have differences of opinion. Everybody's got their fiefdoms. We recognize that as, like, call it a corporation. Anybody who's worked in an office can look at that and realize, okay, these people are kind of like us. You know, and then you even see people in Star Wars getting in Vader's face. Your sad devotion to that ancient religion has not helped you conjure up the stolen data tapes or helped us provide the location of the rebels' hidden, you know. All of that is exposition. All of that is world building. And it all works. Take that and put it next to Rise of Skywalker. And do it, think about it as an analysis. Because Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, all other Star Wars should come from there. In terms of, when I say it doesn't have to be the same stuff, but in terms of the development of everything that's going on. Really interesting. Let's see what you guys are saying. Wow, there's a lot of people saying a lot of stuff. So Nick from Echo Base Network says, Rob, have you seen the Adi-Wan Star Wars Revisited and Empire Strikes Back Revisited special editions? Yeah, they're amazing. You know, there's somebody that understands, Adi-Wan understands canon. And the thing is, when you watch the Adi-Wan special editions, he's the thought put into those things. You're like, oh, somebody really sat down and thought about all this stuff. You wonder, why didn't they do that when they made the special editions in the first place? Michael Kingswood says, I concur about the special editions, so much so that I bought from eBay and still have the THX Laserdisc releases of the original trilogy. I have those as well. I actually have the Japanese Laserdiscs that still have the best color timing ever. Just so I'd never have to deal with the new versions. It's true. Of course, they're not as high res, obviously. Sadhu has been a member for 5 months. Thanks, Sadhu. Ronzilla says, hi, Rob. Question for the audio drama. Are you creating personal Foley sound effects or using stock sound effects or both? Good to see you and take care. Ronzilla, we have a Foley team doing Foley. And so we are creating most of our sound effects ourselves. But there are stock sound effects, for instance, like cars, 30s cars and things like that. So I would say it's a combination of the two, because we are using, so the guns, for instance, like the Browning 9mm is a specific gun, so we have to use those sound effects. But we do have a Foley team. So movies are the same thing. They have a library of sound effects that they use, but they also do Foley. So it's a combination of the two. Thomas Logan says, what if Empire Strikes Back was about Weequay instead of Luke? Well, it wouldn't have been nearly as good now, would it, if Thomas? But we all would have watched it, and if Weequay was interesting, I would have watched that. I always liked Weequay. I always did. Oscar Herrera says, 90% of my Lego sets are Star Wars. I need the Arc 170 set. Yeah, I know, right? Because they're great. PGS Heroes, Sonny Dominguez, the king of squirting, is here. Sonny Dominguez celebrates 37 months of membership. San Diego ComicCon's fans geek out when they see Rob walking the halls. He shows all the places he had sex. No, I never had sex in the convention center. Todd McFarlane stopped by the PGS meet and greet again. I can't, our PGS meet and greet that we had, man, I got really hammered that day, I got to tell you. I can't promise Todd McFarlane's going to stop by, but we'll be around there all weekend. So come to our panel. By the way, we have a True Noir panel on the 25th at 5:30 in room 6A. 1001 Johnny says, he sends in a tip, says, I believe Lucas when he says that Star Wars is for children. Retcon. What I don't understand, why that people don't believe him. What does it mean that it's for kids? That it's kids' stuff? Looney Tunes was for children, but it was trying to make adults, not parents, adults laugh. There is hesitancy adults have for whimsy with their sense of wonder. I dare say kids' stuff is not stuff that is to be considered less than. Rather, it is what adults must leave behind because of responsibilities that they now endure. When they get time to look at the kids' stuff they used to love, they see it as moved on without them to the next generation of kids. Lucas made a story with his original trilogy that was meant to be for children of all generations. This is why it's for children, because they are the ones who learn from it the most. When they grow up and take on responsibility, they now have Luke, Han, and Leia behind them, reminding them that the Force will be with them always. I think that's a fair assessment. I do. But I also think that at the time, what people forget at the time in 1977, it's not like kids' movies were some big juggernaut at the box office. Disney hadn't really, they were re-releasing their old animation. You know, they weren't doing, their animation in the 70s wasn't in the best shape. I mean, they ended up doing things like Black Cauldron in the early 80s. But I think Star Wars is a fairy tale or a fable that appeals to all people. And having been there and having watched theaters, I mean, the theater was not full of adults bringing kids. The theater was full of just as many adults as kids. I don't remember many kids. I mean, on Sunday there was a lot of families that went. But Star Wars was for everyone. And I know Lucas says it was made for kids now. I don't believe, just the same way I don't believe Ridley Scott when he goes, Deckard is a replicant. No, he wasn't. Not when you made that movie, he wasn't. That was something somebody came up with, threw it out, and you've been grappling with it ever since. If Harrison Ford is a replicant in Blade Runner, the movie is meaningless. Because if a replicant's hunting a replicant, who cares? Who cares? The whole point is that replicants, even though they're manufactured people, a byproduct of that, and especially when you gift them with memories, is they have souls too. And if only at that moment of death, Rick Deckard has to recognize that Roy Batty is in fact has a soul. That's the whole crux of the film. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. You know, and I think with Star Wars, when you're watching Star Wars, it's The Adventures of Robin Hood, when it came out, was a movie that certainly appealed to children. But it was made for everybody. You know, and I think great fables are for everyone. And just as many adults love Star Wars as kids did. But over the years, I mean, I'll tell you one thing. George Lucas made Star Wars for everybody, but he made Return of the Jedi for kids. I totally believe that. And that was George Lucas wrested control back. If you read Rinsler's making of books, his coffee table making of books of Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi, there's a lot of stuff in there that you Star Wars fans, if you haven't read those books, they are essential reading, because you realize Lucas was not a fan of Empire. He wasn't as involved with it as you might think. It almost bankrupted his company. He didn't like the way Irvin Kershner shot the film, and yet everyone thinks it's the best Star Wars movie. He got control back. He was working with Richard Marquand. He didn't necessarily direct the film, but he certainly had his hand in it. And I think Lucas, over the course of making those Star Wars movies, decided that they were for kids. And he's sticking to that story. But I don't necessarily believe that they were always that way. Thomas Logan says, imagine a show like Baron Bo Odar's Dark on Netflix, starring Plagueis, where, like Adam, all he does is wield Dark Force alchemy and ruin people's lives. I love Dark. I would watch that show, Thomas Logan. I would watch that show. Tom Jr. Jackson says, will you show the hentai room under the San Diego Comic-Con? Well, that's the hentai sex dungeon that is 30 stories beneath the San Diego Comic-Con Convention Center. I cannot confirm nor deny anything about the hentai dungeon. I can't take people there. It's a mythical place. Only a few people know about it. And I can't tell people. I can't. So, by the way, Thomas Logan's right. If you guys haven't seen Dark, it's really great. So, and by the way, Ronzilla, that was a great question. Thanks for the $20 super chat and the question about the audio drama. I very much appreciated that. And you know what Nick from Echo Base Network asks about, the thing about the Adiwan versions of Star Wars is it's a fan who really understands and has thought a lot about. I think that my frustration has thought a lot about what Star Wars is and is supposed to be. And for me, when I think about my favorite IPs, the biggest frustration that I have with the people that are controlling the IPs that I love, whether it's Star Wars or Star Trek, is the creators today don't spend enough time thinking about the actual wheres and whys of the universes that they're working in. They drift by a lot of minutia because they don't think they need to address it, when what they're completely mistaken, because they don't understand that the audience. You know, a great example of that was how distance ceased to be a thing in later seasons of Game of Thrones. You know, in the first season of Game of Thrones, Robert Baratheon, I say this on the show, takes a month to go from King's Landing to Winterfell. A month. You know, they've got a whole entourage, carriages and horse-drawn carts and all that. But it still took a month. And by the time you get to seasons 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones, people can just go from Dragonstone to Beyond the Wall in, a couple hours. And we as fans were going, wait, what? You told us this. And you can't then you can't expect to create storylines that don't take into consideration distances that you've established over a decade. And I feel that that's where Star Wars is. The people that are creating these shows don't are not taking into consideration the actual mechanics of how things would work. And it like Boba Fett, for instance. If you look at Boba Fett in Empire Strikes Back, he knew Han Solo's trick to float away with the garbage. He was able to plot where they were going. That's why Boba Fett got there and the Empire was there. they arrived weeks before Han Solo because he had no hyperdrive. So how long at sublight speed did it take him to get from outside the asteroid field to Bespin? So, I mean, if you really look at how long, how much time passes in Empire Strikes Back, some people think it's like a couple of days. I've always thought it's months, because how long did it take the Millennium Falcon with no hyperdrive to go from the asteroid field to get to Bespin? And I never thought that Luke trained with Yoda for a couple of days. He was there for weeks. Like the time passing. And a lot of people don't feel that way, but I thought that was understood when I was 13 years old and watching Empire Strikes Back 26 times in the theater. I thought it was a substantial amount of time. Because, you know, when you cut to Luke levitating, he's on one hand, he's upside down and levitating the rock and all this. He didn't just do that in an afternoon. That took a long time and a lot of focus. So, you know, Boba Fett was able to ascertain where Han was going, probably did a bunch of background checks. The Empire came. He had to make a deal with Vader. Lando did. You know, a lot of things went on. So there was time that passed. So, yeah, of course, that I could be wrong. But that's the thing about, we've spent all this time with these IPs, and we know them. We understand why things happen, who does this for whatever reason. And so when they create this stuff willy-nilly, it's like, wow, you're just throwing all this, you're just adding things, and people are like, oh, let's make lightsabers like the wands from Harry Potter. You know, they take on traits of their users and all this. Like, okay, that might work for Harry Potter, but you just took that from something and you're imposing it on another IP. I mean, that's kind of weird. Ben Kenobi said lightsabers are a weapon. They're not as you know, crude like blasters. They're from a more civilized time. They're a weapon. That's all they are. They're a tool. How do I know that? Because Obi-Wan told me. He told me in the first movie when he gave it to Luke. Your father's lightsaber. He wanted you to have this when you're old enough. They're a weapon, according to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, I understand all the other creators that have come in have added all this stuff. But who are they? Is that right? Should they be allowed to do it? And if it doesn't make much sense, why is it then that these people get to create, well, it's canon now, Rob. Is it? Why is it canon now? It's so weird. You get in these arguments about what is and isn't canon. I'm having these ridiculous discussions about bleeding kyber crystals. I'm like, bleeding? What are we talking about? We're talking about a mineral that is used to focus energy in a weapon. That's what it does. You put it in, it's not quite a battery, it's a different thing, but you're using the energy, it refracts it, however it works, however kyber crystal works. Big kyber crystals are used to blow up planets on the Death Star, so hey, can you bleed those? And if not, why? Can you use force powers and make the blast on the Death Star different? I don't know. Why is Luke's lightsaber green? It's like, it's a crazy world we live in. I don't even know. Foxy Scorpio says, Rob, is there any scuttlebutt about a possible Hot Toys Ace Hunter figure? Well, no. I don't think Hot Toys will ever make an Ace Hunter figure. But you know who has Ace Hunter? Actor Barry Bostwick in his brand new audio drama. Do you know who directed Barry Bostwick, Ace Hunter himself? That's right, me. Barry Bostwick plays FDR in True Noir. That's right, the man who was in Rocky Horror Picture Show, the man who's wearing the gold lame or whatever in Megaforce from 1982. The good guys always win, even in the 80s. Ace Hunter is in True Noir. There's a reason to sponsor the... go over to True Noir on Kickstarter and support. Actually, figure out how you can support the show with the buck. But yeah, Barry Bostwick, Spin City, man. Barry Bostwick, Ace Hunter is in True Noir. So, Cody Leach says, funny you mentioned Laserdisc. I was introduced to Star Wars when I was 6, when my uncle sat me and my cousins down and put his Laserdisc on of Return of the Jedi. So I don't have it here. I can't reach my Star Wars Laserdisc, but it's great. I love that. Instant fan. RTNZ, how are you? Where have you been? Hail, Bob. I haven't been here in a while. When I show up, you're discussing real Star Wars and Blade Runner in the same thread. Thanks for bringing a degree of sense and stability to a world gone mad. Well, it's good to see you, man. How are things? And I've missed you. Thomas Logan says, George Lucas said Yoda trained Luke on Dagobah for 2 months. See? There you go. That's how I've always seen it. He was there for a long time. That makes sense. And, yeah, I think that's good. And, remember, when Luke is training with Yoda, it's not because he has midi-chlorians or he's strong with the Force or that. It's that the Force surrounds us and binds us. Not this crude, anybody can tap into the Force. That's kind of the whole point. It's created. It's the energy field created in the universe by all living things. It is literally an energy field that we're walking around all the time. And if you can learn to tap into it, and that was my understanding from, yes, and people can be more adept at the Force, just like people can be better suited to martial arts and things like that. But I always saw the Force as something that anybody could tap into, which is why Luke is able to do it. 1001 Johnny says, be a First Order Stormtrooper, see your former comrade killing your buddies with a fucking lightsaber, call out to him, toss aside your gun and shield, beat the ever-loving shit out of him in a fair 1-to-1, most honorable character in Star Wars. Well, there you go. That's very funny. But yeah, what more can you say? What more can you say? Well, anyway, I'm a lifelong Star Wars fan. I love Star Wars. I always will. Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back are very, very important to me. Everything after that, I can take some of it. Hey, I'm a Attack of the Clones apologist. I won't get into that here, but I mean, I love the end of Attack of the Clones, the whole battle on Geonosis and afterwards. I love it. But it's not great. I understand that, but I still, but anyway, I don't want to invalidate anything I've said tonight already. Look, I think we all love Star Wars and we all want it to be great. The problem is, the first thing that Disney is thinking about is how are we going to make money from this IP? That's it. And on their spreadsheet of people that they'll work with, they'll be like, okay, this person did this. Leslie Headland made Russian Doll. I love Russian Doll. I thought it was really good. The first season I quite enjoyed. I thought it was fresh. So once you've done that, it's like, oh, there's a really great creator. They don't go, would this creator be great for Star Wars? I mean, they do. But, what they want to do is bring the Russian Doll to Star Wars. They don't know that Star Wars is a very specific thing. They just think Star Wars is an IP that we can exploit. Which is, I don't know. I did like Rogue One. I didn't love it because the tie-in to Star Wars doesn't really work. just to be clear. And I do like Andor. Because Andor delved more into the wars side of everything. Which you have to do. So, but on that note, I think I'm going to bring this chat to a close. I want to thank everybody for being here. This was a fun one. If you are going to be at San Diego ComicCon, I will be down there on Wednesday night. Thursday, I have a couple of panels. I'm doing a Star Trek panel with Terry Metalis. I think I might have to do press, so I might not be able to get to that panel. But afterwards, come see me at 5:30 at the True Noir panel in room 6A. And on Saturday, I'm doing Chris Gore's independent film panel. And on Sunday, as always, Starship Smackdown. So, and then we will be having a PGS meetup after our True Noir panel, probably at the Hilton Bayfront outside bar that faces the marina. So there you go. The Phantasmagorium shows here. One of the many problems with the Acolyte I have is the fact that they break their own logic in every episode. Oh, I know. Well, because that's the thing. Unless you are a seasoned veteran of creating fictional worlds, you don't have the real world to lean back on, you have to be very careful. You have to be an expert world builder, and a lot of people aren't. So that's a problem. But on that note, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for being a great moderator. I want to thank all of you who generously support this channel via Super Chats, tips, and memberships. We had 2 great membership calls in a week. We won't have one next week. I love this software because I won't be here. I'll be at ComicCon. And please, if you really want to help me out, please go to Kickstarter, read up on the True Noir podcast. It's actually a fully immersive audio drama. It's 10 chapters. It's going to be about 7 hours long. And Ace Hunter's in it, amongst other people. Katie Sackhoff is in it. I think I already mentioned that. Bill Sadler, who was Sloan on Deep Space Nine, and so many other great things. Don McManus and Bill Sadler were both in Shawshank Redemption together. Big Pussy Bumpensero. Vincent Pastore is in it. Louis Lombardi, who was in Sopranos and 24, is in it. Jeffrey Combs, of course, is in it. It's so much fun. And by the way, it'll blow you guys away. I'm really, really excited for it. It's like a Coen Brothers movie without the movie. So, fully immersive. You'll love it. Help me out. Go to Kickstarter right now. Go read it. Sign up. Hey, if you don't want the series, pledge $1. But what's really cool about it is the Kickstarter runs for a little over 50 days. It's a 2-month Kickstarter, but we need to make more money than we're asking for because we have to pay all those. Actually, we've already paid all the actors, but please help us out. It's going to be really cool. I'm directing and producing and editing it, and I promise you it's going to be cool. And if you get the Blu-ray version, you'll get multiple sound mixes on the Blu-ray, and you'll get a lot of really cool video stuff on that as well. So, on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. Just like with True Noir, all you have to do is listen. And on that note, thanks everybody. And as always, may the Force be with you. Always.